Good morning, everybody. So, there were no real surprises really from George Osborne in terms of personal taxation and the effects on individuals and their families. The main points which I want to talk about this morning are the increase in the personal allowance to £10,000, the reduction in the top rate of income tax, the new childcare scheme which he announced, and actually he didn't announce the child benefit changes, but we are now into the new rules, so I did want to mention those. So, the Chancellor had previously announced his plan to increase the personal allowance to £10,000 before the end of this Parliament. And in his budget, he announced that this will be achieved from April 14. You can see in the graph that the personal allowance, here shown in green, has been steadily increasing since the coalition came to power, which was actually back in 2010. However, the Chancellor didn't mention the threshold at which the 40% higher rate kicks in, shown in red there, which has in fact been creeping down. So, although a lot of low earners will be taken out of income tax altogether, almost 900,000 more people will be paying tax at the 40% rate. Those earning over £100,000 per year will continue to see their personal allowance being reduced by £1 for every £2 of income over £100,000. So I want to take you back now to 1011 when the 50p rate was first introduced, and that was by Alistair Darling under a Labour government. Despite claims it would raise £2.5 billion, it actually only raised about £1 billion of income for HMRC. An astonishing £16 billion of income was deliberately shifted back into 9-10 to avoid this new 50p rate. In fact, with our help, most of our clients who were going to be affected by this took some action to shift their income in this kind of way. A theory that a couple of my colleagues have, which I thought I'd share with you, is that this additional rate was originally intended to be a 45% rate. This is believed to be the optimum rate which maximises tax revenues without putting off taxpayers. With the soon-to-follow general election, this was changed to a 50p rate at the last minute, in the knowledge that if the Conservative Party did indeed get into power, they would immediately have a problem which they'd want to correct. The Conservatives would likely want to reduce the rate, for which the Labour Party knew they'd get a lot of negative press. So, if we fast forward back to the present day, surprise, surprise, those earning over 150,000, the top rate of income tax is indeed being reduced to 45%. And that's coming in from the 6th of April this year. This graph shows the winners and losers for the coming tax year. So you can see on the left-hand side there that those earning 25,000, 50,000 and 100,000 all benefit from the increased personal allowance. But those earning 50,000 and 100,000, this benefit is actually offset by them having more of their income being taxed at 40%. For those earning 150,000, shown there in red, actually lose out. But the biggest winners, by quite some way, are those earning in excess of 150,000. So you can see on the right-hand side there, that example is 200,000 a year. Those guys are saving £2,000 a year. And I think that's been quite widely publicised in the press. So for those that are going to be paying tax at the additional rates, that's those earning over 150,000, there are a couple of planning points that I wanted to mention, but you are going to have to be quick with it being so close to the end of the tax year. Firstly, have you got any scope to delay the income until after the 6th of April so that it's going to be taxed at 45% next year rather than 50% this year? And secondly, is there any scope to bring forward any gift aid donations or pension contributions that you would be making next year? And again, this means you're going to be saving tax at 50% this year as opposed to saving tax at 45% next year. So whilst we're on the topic of pension contributions, the contribution limits are reducing this year. So the annual allowance there is dropping down to 40,000 from 50,000, which it is currently. And the lifetime allowance is dropping to 1.25 million from 1.5 million. So for anyone that has a large fund or that does normally make large annual contributions, then it's probably going to be worth getting in touch with us to see if we can suggest anything to get around that. Okay, so moving on to childcare. The night before the budget, the government announced that they're going to be introducing a new childcare scheme. So firstly, I wanted to recap on what the existing scheme is. So hopefully some of you might be familiar. The current scheme works by the employer providing vouchers which are at various limits depending on what your income is, and that is as a tax-free benefit. The employee can then redeem the vouchers at registered childcare providers, and I think the key there is registered childcare providers. So the new scheme is going to be phased in from autumn 15, and it's going to cover childcare costs of up to £6,000, and that's per year per child. And for that, 20% support will be available from the government. From the first year of operation, all children under 5 are going to be eligible, and then the scheme is going to build up over time to include children under 12. And the scheme will provide support for families where all parents are in work, and the key there is all parents have got to be in work. They can't be receiving support through the tax credit system, and they can't have income over £150,000 a year. The new scheme, this support is going to be provided through a childcare account, which is going to be redeemable at, again, only registered childcare providers. So to me, this scheme seems clearly focused on those who work, which incidentally we hope will include the self-employed. So talking of children, this brings me on to the child benefit payments. We're now into the new rules from January this year, where the entitlement to the benefit is in fact means tested. So to recap, the payments are going to be clawed back through the tax system where someone in the household earns over £50,000 a year. So in this case, we think you only really have 2 options. First option is stop claiming your child benefit. And we think this might be a bad idea if you're not working, as the child benefit gives you credits against your national insurance record when it comes to your state pension, which I think David's going to touch on later. And the second option, continue to receive the child benefit, but then pay the tax charge, which is 1% of the child benefit for every £100 of income between 50 and 60,000. So to demonstrate the tax charge, we've got this graph here. So you can see on the left-hand side there, for somebody earning £52,000 a year, they're actually going to be keeping only 80% of their child benefit. And on the right-hand side, for somebody earning £60,000 a year, the tax charge is in fact going to equal the child benefit, so you'd lose it. We're advising our clients to continue to receive the child benefit because, as well as the national insurance point, if you're not working, it is sometimes difficult to predict what your income might be, and your income could end up being lower than you first expected. For example, for those who are self-employed, your business profits might be lower. So as I say, we are advising clients to continue to claim the child benefit. Interestingly, the tax charge is due on the highest earner, which isn't necessarily the one who receives the child benefit. This means we could have the following situation. So consider Joey and Rachel, who are living together and they are in a relationship. Joey is supposedly a successful actor, earning £58,000 a year, whilst Rachel works in a shop, earning £20,000, and Rachel is claiming child benefits for her daughter. In this example, it's going to be Joey that has the additional tax charge, and on those numbers it'd be 80% of the child benefit, which works out roughly at £850 a year. So hopefully some of you might be thinking, how is Joey going to pay over this tax charge? Well, the answer is complete a tax return if he doesn't already. I think this is going to create some interesting challenges this year because yet more people are going to be brought into the self-assessment system. It seems to me that the Chancellor has now irritated stay-at-home parents in 3 distinct separate ways. Number 1, it's still not possible to transfer the personal allowance between parents. So if for example, the husband is working and the wife isn't, it'd be nice if the husband could use the wife's personal allowance against his income. The second point, for those families where one parent does earn over 50,000, then as we saw earlier, you're going to be losing your child benefit. And finally, with the new childcare scheme, taxpayers' money is going to be used to fund the childcare for where the families are in work. So the question is the Chancellor therefore discouraging what many would call stay-at-home parenting or full-time parenting? Okay, so moving away from families, for those of you that have got clients, or you yourselves are perhaps thinking of moving overseas, as announced in the 2011 budget, the government is going to introduce a statutory residence test. I'm not going to go into the detailed rules now, except to say the legislation will be introduced this year, and as well as defining what your tax residence is going to be, in certain circumstances it will provide for the tax year to be split between a UK part and an overseas part, and it will contain some new rules for the taxation of certain income and gains where you're in a period of temporary non-residence. So, for example, if you're in employment overseas, perhaps. As I said, the legislation does come in from the 6th of April, so if you think this is going to affect you, then please do get in touch with us. So, moving on to capital gains tax. There are no major announcements regarding capital gains tax. The annual exemption is staying at around 11,000 over the coming years. You can see there, the immediate year, it's going to be 10,900. And the rates have remained at 18% and 28%. So whilst on the topic of capital gains tax, we at Howard Worth think that the entrepreneur's relief is a rather generous relief, and are wondering if it's only a matter of time before we see some changes to this. We have been making the most of the relief in its current form and helping a number of our clients take advantage of this generosity by assisting them sell goodwill on incorporation of their businesses. This effectively allows them to extract funds from their business at a rate of 10%. So, inheritance tax. There are only a couple of announcements worth mentioning. The nil rate band has been frozen at 325,000, and that's going to be until April 2018. So for those with estates in excess of this, it's going to be worth thinking about whether you can do any lifetime planning. To demonstrate the effects of this freeze, I've got this graph. So imagine a joint estate worth £1 million, and if we were to go through the process and calculate the inheritance tax on that, it would come out at 14% of the £1 million. So if we assume a 3% rate of inflation, taking us up to 2018, and rework the inheritance tax calculation, it comes out at just about 18%. So you can see there that the freezing of the nil rate band is going to have significant effects for those that have got large estates. And secondly, the second point I wanted to make was there's been an amendment to the rules which allow liabilities on death to be deducted from the assets against which they're secured. So consider this situation. We have a shop owner whose house is worth £1 million, and the trolley is his business, and that's worth £2 million. It's a bit of an expensive trolley, but there we go. It's likely that the business element, so the bottom half, the trolley, is going to be covered by business property relief. So it's only going to be his house that's subject to inheritance tax. So if the shop owner then decides to take out a £300,000 loan, the current rules mean that the £300,000 liability, which is secured against his house, actually reduces the value of the house for inheritance tax purposes. So what the shop owner's done here, he started with an asset of £1 million, which is going to be subject to inheritance tax, and he's finished up with an asset of £700,000. So he's effectively converted some of the value in his house into an asset which qualifies for a relief. So this is also going to apply with agricultural property relief as well. So the new rules, you're not going to be able to offset that loan against the asset at which it's secured against. Instead, the liability will be offset against the asset which you've funded with the loan. So in this case, it would be offset against the trolley, so you'd lose the £300,000. So your start and finish position would be the same, so it'd have no effect. Okay, so the Chancellor announced a new scheme aimed at supposedly helping people get onto the property ladder. And there are two elements to this scheme. The first of which is being an equity loan provided by the government, and this loan can be worth up to 20% of the value of a new build home and is repayable once the house is sold. This is not limited to first-time buyers and will not be means tested, but the value of the home is capped at £600,000. And the second element to the scheme is a mortgage guarantee scheme, which is aimed at increasing the availability of mortgages to those with small deposits. So the scheme offers a guarantee to lenders who offer mortgages to people who've got deposits between 5 and 20%. It'll be open to everyone, so it's not just going to be open to first-time buyers. Again, it's not going to be means tested, and it's going to have a £600,000 property value cap. So the Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls, was quite quick to point out that on the face of it, this mortgage scheme will help people, no matter how high their income, to buy a subsidised second home worth up to £600,000. And from what I've heard, the public reaction to these announcements has been somewhat mixed. On the one hand, you've got the people that have got grown-up kids living at home who think it's a great idea, it's going to help them, help the children move out and buy the first house. But on the other hand, there's those asking, why should we allow taxpayers' money to fund homes or second homes for those that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford them? An interesting idea picked up by the Times newspaper would be for those with low deposits who are perhaps stuck on a high interest rate with existing mortgages, that is, to remortgage. This scheme is not going to prevent people remortgaging. So you could switch, or theoretically you could switch to a cheaper rate, which normally would only be reserved for those that have much higher deposits, a 20% deposit versus a 5% deposit. So all in all, we think this is a move towards getting people buying houses again, and should hopefully, fingers crossed, be welcome news to our clients who are in the building industry. And on that note, I'll pass you over to Mike.